Great. Why don't we go ahead and get started here? Thank you again for joining us. My name is Dave Javid with Plan to Place. I'm part of the consulting team led by Ramey & Associates. And we're here today to discuss transportation and mobility related to the Shape SSF or general plan update process. And we've had a series of meetings to date. And we have a lot of great information to share with you here today. But before we do that, we typically like to have our Spanish interpreter read this next slide. If we can go to the next slide, please, and we can open up that room for anyone that would like to view this in Spanish. So Jasmine, over to you.
Para los que necesitan interpretación en simultáneo en español, por favor, vean en su barra de herramientas, hay un símbolo de un globo. Por favor, hagan clic en el símbolo del globo y allá pueden escoger español como lenguaje preferida. Así van a oír toda la presentación en español. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. And with that, the Spanish room is now open. So we can go on to the next slide. So again, thank you very much for joining us here tonight. We have a full agenda for you. The core of the agenda is for us to present to you the policy framework for transportation and mobility. Again, there's been a series of meetings to date and a few others on different topics. Today's is on transportation, and we'll describe to you kind of how that information came together and how that will be used to move the general plan process along as we develop different elements of the general plan. We also are going to have some live polling. We'll have questions that we'll be asking you all throughout the meeting to make it as interactive as possible. Then most importantly, we're going to have space at the end of the meeting. We typically break up into small groups depending on how many folks join us today. We might actually just stay together in the main room, but we have some discussion prompts that we want to take you through and to be able to gather some input from you while we're here together today. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps and what's to come. So if we go on to the next slide. So as I mentioned, we will be doing a live polling, but there's also an opportunity throughout the discussion for you to give us feedback on questions or comments that you might have through the chat window. That will be open throughout the meeting. So feel free to use that to send us your comments, and we'll be putting it up on a virtual board that we'll be keeping track of, and we could address it near the end of the presentation and again during the small group discussions. We also, again, as I mentioned, we'll have those live polls. You'll see that popping up. But then after the meeting, we're also going to have a series of surveys for each one of these topics. Today's transportation topic will have the full policy framework on the project website that you can go and leave comment on. We'll talk about kind of that interactivity, but it should be a fun and creative way for you to be able to leave even more information for us and also let your colleagues know to help join the conversation. And again, that will be at www.shapessf.com or .net. So we'll kind of get into that a little bit later as well. So if we go on to the next slide. So we are now going to jump into our first live poll. And this is really meant to just to get a better sense of demographics of who's joining us here today. So that what I'd like to ask you to do is if you can get on mentee.com, which is where this will be administered. So that's www.mentee.com. And then once you're there, you'll enter the following code, 27055531. And again, you could do this on your mobile phone. You could do it on the computer you are right now, but it's another kind of fun, creative way of getting some information from you all before we dive into the presentation. So the next slide will also give you a QR code that you can take a snapshot of the screen of. If that would be more helpful to do it that way. So that's another avenue for you to get plugged in. And I could already see a few of you taking the survey, which is awesome. So Taylor, I'm going to ask you to stop sharing and I'll bring up my screen here. And then I'm going to actually turn it over to Eric.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to start with a little bit of an icebreaker this morning. My name is Eric Yerkovich. I'm a principal at Ramey & Associates. I'm glad to see many of you back who have been to other of the policy framework meetings already. And so we just want to start with kind of a fun question. So are you wearing pajamas right now? Yes, no, or you're not telling. And many of you are actually wearing pajamas, which is terrific. And I can't wait till we get into breakout rooms and we can see all your creative pajamas. You can go to the next one, Dave. So as Dave mentioned, we've been tracking throughout the process information about who's been attending the general plan events so that we can make sure to provide lots of different opportunities for different groups in the community to participate in the process. So we want to know how old you are, first of all. So are you under 18, 18 to 30, 31 through 65, or 65 and older? So votes are still coming in. We encourage you all to participate. You can join us. If you've joined a little bit late, you can go to, at the top of the screen, you can see www.mentee.com, and the access code is 27055531. It's also in chat. All right, thanks, Dave. We're also looking at who is participating in the process from a race and ethnicity perspective. So do you identify as white, Black, Native American, Pacific Islander, American Indian or Native American, Latino, or Hispanic? And again, these are really helping us to make sure we understand who is participating in the process so that we can ensure that we are getting a broad representation from lots of different members of the community. All right, Dave, you can go to the next one. We also want to know what neighborhood you live in. So these are a selection of the different planning sub-areas within the community. So they're a little bit higher level than your HOA or your neighborhood, but we're just trying to get a sense of where folks are coming from in the community and who is participating in the process. Thanks. You can go to the next one. And then we also want to know where you work. So this is a really important question. We start to think about mobility network. So where you live and then where you go for your job. So these are the different planning sub areas in South San Francisco. Great. Thanks, everyone. And then one last question for you today is, so have you attended another Shape SSF event in the past? This could be a community workshop, community advisory committee meeting. Looks like we've got some folks who've been to previous meetings before and a couple new faces today. So looking forward to hearing from you all today. I think we can switch over the slides. And we'll, as Dave said, have a couple more opportunities in the presentation today for you all to tell us a little bit more about yourself and some of your experiences around the mobility network as we go through the presentation. Taylor, if you could pull up the presentation. So just for the next few minutes before I hand it over to Taylor McAdam from Fair and Pierce to talk about transportation, I'm just going to do a very quick overview of what the general plan is, what it'll address, and then some of our engagement to date. As many of you all know, the general plan is a long-range policy document for the city. Every city in California and every county in California is required by the state to have and regularly maintain their general plan. The plan itself sets forth a 20-year vision for the future, kind of building on key community strengths and assets while tackling new and emerging challenges. And in this sector, in this conversation today, we're going to be talking about mobility, and there's a lot of changes that are happening in transportation and mobility now that will play out over the next 20 years of the general plan. And the general plan itself will guide both policy as well as future development projects within the city. You go to the next slide, Taylor. This graphic really shows a simplified process for the general plan update. We kicked it off in 2019 with a discovery phase where we reviewed existing conditions and published a series of reports on things like transportation and mobility. We then really worked with the community and the Community Advisory Committee to understand what you all love about South City and what you'd like to see in the future. This listening really helped us to understand and to draft the vision, core values, and principles of the general plan, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. We then moved into a phase where we looked at land use and mobility alternatives for the city. And now we're really moving into that phase where we're starting to review some initial policy ideas for each of the elements of the general plan. You can go to the next slide. And during the process, we have completed a significant number of community engagement activities. And this slide is really just a snapshot of that engagement. These include in-person activities before the pandemic, things like visioning workshops, sub-area meetings. And then during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've pivoted to virtual engagement. And so you've seen more virtual meetings, online surveys, and so forth. You can go to the next slide. And we heard a lot of really excellent ideas during that engagement process. And these really, as I mentioned, helped us to define some of those key issues, some areas for policy exploration, as well as the vision and guiding principles. And this graphic just illustrates a few of those policy and programmatic ideas that were raised during the land use and mobility alternatives process. And they've been really directly integrated into the policy frameworks that we'll be reviewing with you through this series of community conversations. Next slide. Now, these series of community conversations are really an interim step in helping us develop what we call the chapters or the elements of the general plan. And we have a series of these kind of topic-specific discussions like around mobility and sustainability, as well as more focused planning sub-area conversations as well. And these are really centered around what we call a policy framework. And this is a physical document that you can find at www.shapessf.net. And these are really intended to be kind of an interim step. So a 50 to 75% draft of what you might see in the general plan elements themselves. And we want to give everyone an opportunity now to kind of weigh in on those ideas and the kind of direction before we finalize all the chapters of the general plan in that public review general plan document. Next slide. As I mentioned in an earlier, we took an initial step in the general plan process to develop that community vision with you all. And as you think about that policy framework that we're going to talk about today, really consider it how it relates back to the vision and guiding principles that I'm going to discuss now. The next slide. The community vision really provides an umbrella for the general plan. It articulates where we want to be in 2045. So South San Francisco is a place where everyone can thrive. It's high quality of life, diverse and inclusive community, livable neighborhoods, and excellent services, culture of innovation, and environmental leadership ensure all people have equitable opportunity to reach their full potential. Next slide. So throughout our engagement process, we also heard from community members about a series of kind of shared values or shared beliefs. These included things around innovation, sustainability, equity and inclusion, and livability. And while the general plan vision tells us where we want to be in the future, and the policies and actions that we're going to talk about in the mobility section really articulate what we're going to do in the future, these community values really help to describe how we are going to implement those goals, policies, and actions. Next slide. And then finally, we have, with the help of the community, really defined these sort of guiding principles for the general plan update. These include affordable, safe neighborhoods, high quality services, a safe and convenient transportation network, a resilient community, a vibrant downtown, and a prosperous economy. Now we're going to really today with Taylor really start to talk about what a safe and convenient transportation really looks like in South San Francisco and how we continue to build upon the assets that are in the community to really get to that vision in the future. Now with that, I'll turn it over to Taylor to talk through the transportation system. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, transportation is one of the topics in the general plan. And we of course, encounter transportation decisions every time we leave our house. We decide what mode to use, biking, walking, driving, taking a bus or train, and what route to use. And the transportation system also influences bigger decisions, such as whether we want to buy another car or an electric bike maybe, and whether we need to move to be closer to our job or to a transit station. When we plan for South City's transportation needs, we think also about land use patterns that make commute trips, grocery runs, and daycare drop-offs either shorter because those places are close to our home, or longer if our jobs or our grocery stores are far away from our neighborhoods, our residential neighborhoods. We think also about the design of the travel network, including the roads, sidewalks, paths, and railways. We also think about the options for storing our vehicles at the beginning and end of a trip, including our car vehicles, but also smaller vehicles like strollers or bicycles or scooters. And finally, we think about the transportation services and programs, kind of the rules about the transportation system, if you will. So free shuttles, should they be free? Or bike share, should we have a system where you can share bikes, or does everyone need their own? Also parking, should we ask people to pay for parking? If so, where? And then Uber and Lyft rides, can we hire a temporary ride so that we don't have to own a car all the time? Transportation really affects quality of life, and that is a key outcome of this general plan. So transportation policy choices are key to achieving many of the quality of life outcomes that matter to South City residents. Currently, 90% of all South City trips are driving trips. The existing kind of auto-centric transportation system is an unsustainable model that generates pollution at unhealthy levels and greenhouse gas emissions that exacerbate climate change. The current system is also, it's not only a climate risk, but it relies on infrastructure that was built for a different era when population, not only of South City, but of the entire Bay Area region was smaller and life was lived closer to home. Today's reality is one of trans-bay commutes. Many people cross the bay or cross county lines to get to their jobs today. It's also one of regional entertainment venues. We go to Santa Clara to see a 49ers game, or up now to San Francisco to see a Warriors game. So even our entertainment and kind of fun activities are not necessarily local. And many goods and services, the freight in our region are delivered across counties and regions. So freeways are really built out to capacity today, and even still are bursting at the seams with traffic during those commute hours. So, the Bay Area's population is also expected to grow by another 1.5 million people in the next few decades. So from a simple geometric perspective, we can't fit everyone onto our current transportation network. And so less space intensive forms of travel will be required to keep the region moving. And one great example of that is Caltrain's plan to expand its frequency, the number of trains it runs every hour. And that train capacity is equivalent to 5.5 lanes of freeway capacity. And that's the kind of space efficient modes that I'm talking about. Health and safety are also inextricably linked to the transportation system. Roadway collisions are the leading cause of death actually for people in the US between the ages of 1 and 54. And more than half of all road traffic deaths occur among vulnerable roadway users. So pedestrians, cyclists, motorcycles, and designing safer roads is primarily an exercise for in trade-offs. So it requires reducing vehicle speed limits on local streets and allotting more time at intersections for pedestrians, but that also means less time for vehicle throughput. It also means relinquishing road space to vulnerable users in the form of dedicated bicycle lanes and wider sidewalks and crosswalks. Finally, transportation policy offers an opportunity to deliver mobility solutions in a more equitable manner. Transportation is the second largest cost for many households, and the cost largely depends on the location of your home in relation to your job. And the relation of both of those, kind of the proximity of both of those to high quality transit options. Because housing is quite costly in San Mateo County, it is often the case that the households that can least afford it are making the longest, most expensive commutes. So this points towards a better jobs housing balance as an equitable long-term transportation outcome, but we can also make decisions that benefit low-income communities in the near term. And this includes policies such as making sure we implement means-based user fees. So those who have the most ability to pay will pay the highest fare, and those who have lower incomes get a reduced fare. It also means improving our transit systems and the reliability of those systems so that they are equally as good, if not better, than the option of driving. So what we learned and heard in doing kind of all of our homework, if you will, for this general plan is we learned a few things. The first is that I'm going to talk through 5 main themes that we discovered. The first is kind of this idea just that the region continues to grow. And it's doing so in a way that is not necessarily balanced. So San Mateo County and South San Francisco are both adding more jobs than they are adding housing, which means that jobs housing balance is not, we haven't achieved it yet, and it is continuing to, that gap is continuing to widen. So that's why it's important through this general plan to add more housing locally. And of course, COVID kind of work from home rules may slow some of this development, but it's certainly not going to stop it in the long run. The second point is that we know that our roadways are at capacity, that congestion and traffic and travel times are very frustrating today. And again, this kind of has to do with that geometric challenge problem that I mentioned. We just can't fit everyone that wants to move today or in the future onto our roadway network. And so if 90% of all trips and 80% of work trips are occurring by driving, that is not sustainable. And similarly, we know the pandemic has reduced peak period kind of cars on the road, but already that is starting to return to normal levels. Even in the last week, I saw many news reports about traffic levels picking back up. The third thing is that, car travel is unsustainable from not just how many people can you fit on a roadway, but for greenhouse gas emissions and pollution levels. Transportation is the leading source of greenhouse gas emissions in California. And passenger vehicles, meaning just everyday vehicles that people drive, are the leading source of those emissions. The fourth finding is really about safety, and that safe streets are achievable with some policy changes. So out of, the California sort of compares cities of similar size, and South San Francisco is a mid-sized city. And so in some of these metrics, you can see that there is significant room for improvement. So it has the 9th most pedestrian injury collisions for people under the age of 15. 15 most hit and run collisions, and you can see kind of these other metrics. And one really important finding is that 50%, so half of all collisions occur on just 8% of the city's streets. So we're not saying you have to change every single roadway to fix this issue, but if you just focus energy on a small number of streets where most collisions occur, you could make a big difference. And the final thing is that transit connections really do matter, and South San Francisco is in an unusually lucky position to have so many regional transit connections. There are important high frequency Samtrans lines. The Caltrain runs through the city, and there's a new station that's under construction kind of at the end of Grand Avenue. And, the ferry, and then of course, BART, there's a South City BART station, as well as San Bruno nearby to the Lindenville area. But one of the big challenges is many of those regional connections are very difficult to access today. 101 is a major barrier to getting to the ferry and the Caltrain in east of 101 area. And although BART is close to some residents, it's not close to all, and there are not easy ways to get there, which is why you see that because BART and Samtrans are more integrated into the fabric of community, their ridership is a lot higher. So what we heard, here are some of the other topics that we really heard from residents, many of you and employees, many on the call today. In previous meetings was a concern about residential parking and just parking in general, and finding it increasingly difficult to park in your neighborhoods. Safety and maintenance. So this is kind of related to the collisions and the safety topic I mentioned previously, but especially in some of the formerly industrial areas of the city, east of 101 and Lindenville, improving maintenance. Multimodal facilities, a desire for facilities. This is the Caltrain station, but for other facilities to really accommodate many more modes of access. So bikes, how do you get up from a bike or on a bike to the Caltrain station, for example? Of course, traffic is a never-ending frustration and something we want to think about in this plan. And then trail connections. Lots of love for the Centennial Trail, but also frustration that it's difficult to access in some parts of the city. So we have a few more mentee questions about how you travel. So I'm going to turn it back over to Eric, but again, you can go to mentee.com and put in this access code.
Thanks, Taylor. And so we just have a couple of questions for you all about your commuting pre and post pandemic. And so I think this is just interesting. We've heard a lot about how people are maybe going to change their travel behaviors after the pandemic because we've kind of ingrained these social behaviors of working from home. So how did you get to work prior to the COVID-19 pandemic? So did you drive, did you carpool, did you walk, did you take a bus or bike or train, taxi? We just kind of have a sense of how you all got to your employment. Here we go. A lot of folks drove, but a couple of people take the train as well, or bike. It's about half and half. And go to the next slide. Oh, there's more people coming with driving. Oh, here we go. So a lot of folks are driving alone, but about half of the people who have done this took another mode, whether it's transit or biking. So just, you can go to the next slide. And then for those of you who intend to be in the office post-pandemic, so we know that at some point in the future, the world might look a little different again. So what do you think about how you'll be in the office? Will you be in there at all? Will you be in there just 1 to 2 days a week, 3 days a week, maybe 4 to 5, or only for kind of important meetings? You kind of want to hear a little bit about, how you got to work before, but then how you think, how much time you'll spend in the office afterwards, right? And so these are thinking about some of the types of trips and how travel behavior has changed over the last, what's exactly almost 1 year to date, pretty much since the shelter-in-place ordinances were done. And as you can see, a number of people who are going to be in the office for only important meetings or only a couple times a week. So thanks for everyone for telling us a little bit more about your commuting and how you intend to be in the office in the future. Thanks. I'll turn it back over to Taylor.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, so now we kind of talked about, what we've observed about South City specifically to date, as well as just regional trends and some, kind of key policy choices that we might want to make as part of this general plan. And so all of that fed into our policy framework, which is what we're here to talk about today. And that is really, it is where we want to be in the future. So the framework that we've set up for this for the policies are, we first think about outcomes. And so this is a statement describing where we want to be in 2040, almost like a vision statement, but a little bit more specific. Then we think about the goals. So, what do we need to do in order to get to that outcome? And then even more kind of, as we zoom in even further, we then get to policies and measures. And these are, actual implementation kind of action items and steps. And when we put this framework together and then we say, how are we going to know if we've been successful with these action items and goals and outcomes? And we come up with performance metrics, which actually can measure those outcomes in a quantitative way. And we come up with targets. So, do we want this metric to be increasing, or do we want to hit a specific number even? And so that's what we're going to present today. And it's important to remember that these frameworks, the framework I'm sharing today for transportation, is an interim step. It is not final. This is just, the best we've come up with so far, but it's super important to hear from you all. And then these are available on the website as well for comments from the public and stakeholders. So please share your feedback today. And then even if you have more feedback, you can also go on the website and we might add additional policies or tweak the ones we've come up with so far. Also, I am not going to present every single policy that we've come up with today in detail. I'm just going to kind of go through at a high level. If you have questions about a specific policy that's on the screen that I didn't talk about, I would be happy to talk about that in the discussion group or afterwards. So I'm not going to talk forever because that would be boring for everyone. But our desired outcomes for transportation, we really have 5. And safe, this is probably the 10th time I've said that word so far. It's really an important priority given the impact it has on our quality of life. And it is something I think is maybe under discussed in transportation planning. So safe, multimodal, we want people to be able to get around the city with using a variety of different methods. Sustainable, so this is both, from a kind of environmental perspective, but also can we actually keep growing the way we are and while still being able to move. Livable, it's not a pain in the butt to get around the city is really what that means. and connected. And this is connected both internally and connected to the region. So as an example of those performance metrics and the targets I mentioned, I'll just call out a couple. And so this is, again, kind of by 2040, this is where we hope to be. So for transportation collisions, we want to actually eliminate all severe and fatal collisions on the city's roadway network. This is part of a Vision Zero kind of framework, and the city adopted a Vision Zero framework a few months ago. That is something that is a trend around the world, trying to eliminate collisions. A second is % of trips by each mode of travel. And the target here is that we really want the share of trips made by walking, biking, and transit to increase. In terms of travel time to activity centers, so this is like thinking about that livability goal. We want to increase the number of residents who can get to downtown within 15 minutes. And we're not specific about what mode we want people to use to get there, because we may be able to get many residents to downtown on transit, but that means not, if every bus full were to switch to driving, it would be too congested to get everyone downtown. So what's most important is that there's a mode that can get you to downtown in 15 minutes in the future. Regional transit use. So we have some big goals here, I think, but they are achievable for the city and really important to help people continue to move. So doubling Samtrans ridership and BART ridership, tripling ferry ridership, and actually increasing Caltrain ridership by 10 times what it is today, which is a very low number. So we're starting from a low baseline and hoping to grow substantially. So again, there's 5 outcomes, and kind of each of the colors here corresponds with each one of those outcomes. So I'm going to run through these and not spend a ton of time on the details, but we can talk about those in the breakout rooms. So the first outcome is really safety for people of all ages and abilities, and also regardless of whether you're biking, walking, driving. And a few things we can do here are, kind of complete a really take a proactive approach, which could include completing a local road safety plan, which the city is actually already doing. And in doing that, identify what we call a high injury network, which is where you identify the streets within the city where the majority of the collisions occur. Kind of, as I mentioned, there's that 8%. Other things are to then, once you have that framework in place, really prioritize, maintenance requests and upgrades on that high injury network, because we know it is more vulnerable to cause, resulting in collisions. And the same thing, kind of enhancing lighting in key spots in the city. And here's actually a snapshot of that. This is a very draft version of what a high injury network would look like, but these roadways that are highlighted in red are the portions of the city's network where the majority of the collisions, which are these purple clusters underneath, occur. So you can see that if we just focus our safety efforts on these red roads, we can dramatically reduce collisions. So then another outcome is comfortable and convenient for all modes. And what we want to think about here is really starting to build streets that are what we call complete streets, which means that they have a space for everyone, not just for drivers, and that we prioritize active transportation and transit projects. And we want to prioritize those because historically they have not been prioritized and our streets have been designed for vehicles. So a few things we can do here are, close gaps in the bicycle and pedestrian network. So if, Centennial Trail, for example, is a fantastic facility But there are portions where you can't actually, you'd have to walk almost a mile before you can actually get onto the trail. And so we want to make sure that folks in Sunshine Gardens, for example, have better access to Centennial Trail. We also, want to just add features which are pretty low cost, but make the experience of biking or walking more pleasant in the city. So adding bicycle detection at signals, which means that if you bike up to a signal, you don't wait there forever because the signal is better at sensing you as a bicyclist, even though you're not as heavy as a car. And here's kind of an example of what I mean by complete streets is, we still have right-of-way for vehicles and it's convenient for them to travel, but it also means making bicycle lanes, making high visibility crosswalks, and curb corners where it makes it easy for pedestrians to see the street and vehicles to see the pedestrians. It also means in some places, and most likely in downtown, that potentially we kind of create permanent space for outdoor dining so that the street, because it is a public space, is not just a space for traveling here and there, but also is actually a public amenity in other ways. So then proactively managing traffic congestion and parking is definitely another, I keep calling these outcomes, but these are goals, I'm sorry. So proactively managing traffic congestion is a goal. And we want to do this by using parking management tools. So making sure kind of the minimum parking requirements for new developments make sense. If it's right next to the Caltrain station, then that development shouldn't have as many parking spaces because we want folks in that development to use Caltrain. It also means specifically for the east of 101 area, which is where the majority of commuters are coming from, it means potentially putting in a trip cap, which will really incentivize employers and employees in that area to use an alternative mode of transportation. Then another goal is to, make sure development patterns reduce the number of vehicle trips and the length of our trips. And this ties into curbing our emissions, kind of that sustainability goal, and increasing livability. So as new developments come online, let's make sure their transportation they're linked to the transportation network in a way that reduces driving, essentially. This also includes equitable access to transit service. So one of the policies we want to pursue is providing free local bus service to city residents. And we might do this by asking for a development to pay a fee for, vehicle trips that are kind of over, we'll give them a certain number of trips that they can make based on how big the building is. And then anything over that, they pay a fee, and that goes into supporting free transit. And this is an example, actually, this is San Diego. And you can kind of see that the developments that would occur in the area closest to downtown, so in South City, this would be the area closest to downtown and the Caltrain station, they don't have to do much in the way of providing those extra fees or incentives because they've already located their building in a place where it's easy to use transit, walking, and biking. But if you are in these further away zones, then you have to pay into that vehicle miles fee, or you have to contribute to building additional bicycle lanes so that all parts of the city have access to a great transportation network. Then reasonable travel times for all mobility needs, and this is that livability outcome. So right-sizing the parking supply and maximizing the efficiency of curb space. So in areas where there's a lot of demand, such as downtown, it may not make sense for the curb to be just a home for vehicle storage. You can serve a lot more people if some of those parking spaces are turned into loading spaces or are potentially, bus stops, because one bus brings 6, 7 people at every 15 minutes to downtown, and one car might sit there for a couple hours. So really thinking critically about how we use our transportation space. Easy access to play, fitness, and active transportation networks is another goal. This, of course, depends on building those parks. And I know we've had a session, we'll have a session on parks in the future. So it means you have to put the parks, build new parks, but it also means making sure you have, the sidewalk network and the bike lanes to get you there. And here, our last couple goals are transit stations are a first choice for regional travel, but they're also a destination in their own right, meaning the transit station is a cool place to hang out. It has other amenities, maybe food, maybe there's, a bank on site. So it's a destination as well, which encourages people to use transit. And this means really, leveraging kind of the awesome business community that we have in South City to help us make these regional transit stations the best they can be. So that was a quick overview of our policy framework. I'm gonna, again, turn it back over to Eric. We have a final mentee poll here. So if you would just wanna go, or you're probably already hanging out on mentee.com, but you can type in this code again.
Thanks, Taylor. And Dave, if you would pull up the mentee slide, that would be terrific. We just want to ask just a couple of quick questions. I think Taylor, yeah, thank you. We just want to ask a couple of quick questions about how you might consider changing your travel. In particular, we're interested in how you might change your travel from car driving. So if you're thinking about how we might change either your trips to work or your short trips to the library or the grocery store or other places, what might incentivize you to change your travel? So things like reduced transit fares, better bicycle infrastructure, improved walking conditions like sidewalks, crossings, increased parking costs, more frequent transit service, and new transit modes. And these are just a few ideas of just to get you thinking as we start to talk about the policy frameworks in our small group discussion. These are some of the ideas that are embedded in that. And it looks like more frequent transit service and reduced transit fares are some of the things that you guys are looking at, and even new transit modes, things like glideways or other kind of personal rapid transit. Thanks for you all for doing that. And we have one more question. And so what is the most important factor in determining your mode of travel for your trip? So as Taylor said, we travel all the time. We walk outside of our door and we make a decision about how we're going to move around the city. So is it speed? Is it ease of access, comfort, your health, your privacy, or all of these factors all together? I'd like to just kind of hear from you about what are the most important factors in deciding your mode of travel. So we have a lot of folks who are weighing in with multiple factors, which makes a lot of sense. Some people with speed, so how quickly you can get to from your origin to your destination. All right, and with that, I think we'll kind of close the poll, and we will turn it over to Dave to kind of talk about the breakout group discussions.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Actually, Taylor, if you wouldn't mind bringing the presentation back up if you have it. Thank you so much. Yeah, so as we mentioned earlier, and as Eric just mentioned, this is the most important stage of this meeting, is to hear from you all. So what we're going to do is we're going to break up into 2 groups, and I have those set up, and I'm going to open those rooms up here in a minute. And we're just going to move into those groups. You're going to have a facilitated conversation with members of the project team, and really just an informal conversation with you all. I think you're mics will probably be unmuted, so you can kind of informally have a conversation that way, and or use the hand raise function, which I'm sure you're all experts at using at this point, to be able to share your input verbally that way, and or you could actually even use the chat there as well, to have that conversation. So we'll have about, I think about a half an hour or so for that conversation, and then we'll come back and do a quick report out, so we can hear key themes that were discussed in each one of those groups. And then we have a few next step slides to share with you all of the meetings that are coming up, and again, where to go to access more information. So if we go to the next slide, so in general, these are the 4 buckets that we're hoping to have the conversations around, and we'll have resources available to pull back up into those rooms as well, including a shared virtual whiteboard where we're going to be taking all the information that we gather from you all, but generally want to have you consider the outcomes, and if there's other outcomes that we haven't considered that you think we should. Generally talking about the policy ideas presented and which you think might be best, and again, we can pull those back up to have those as a resource. Are there other policy ideas that weren't listed that should be considered? And then anything else in general about mobility that you'd like to have a conversation about. And again, we'll have a very kind of informal discussion there, be able to report back to the larger group, and then send you on your way, hopefully right around 1. So with that, I have the room set up now. I'm going to click open rooms, and you're going to see something pop up on your screen and ask you to migrate to one of the 2 rooms, and then we'll see you back here shortly. So have fun.
Dave, did we want to ask if there are any Spanish speakers?
Yes, we do. That was actually, I was just thinking about that as I was about to press open. Thank you, Diana. We do have Spanish interpretation that's been going on throughout this presentation, and I'd like to ask through the Spanish interpreter if there are any folks that have joined us here today that would like to join a room that would be facilitated in Spanish. And if you would like that, if you could use the raise hand feature, which is at the bottom of your participant window, to let us know. You can click on reactions and go to raise hand that way. And if so, we can open up that room separately. And I don't see any hands being raised. Okay, I think we'll leave it as we have it with 2 groups. So you should see that popping up on your screen now. And if you have any issues, I could definitely move you into those rooms as well. Have fun all.
You know, you got to have strong legs ultimately to really bike up and down and through the city. So I think the general theme there that coming out of that is just, you know, we need flexibility, we need choices, and we need to kind of figure out how to make mobility within the city work for sort of everyone's different needs, and that there isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution, but what there can be is kind of more variety and more ways of kind of building upon what's working and what isn't today, and shifting to something a little bit more, you know, a little bit more variety in the future.
Great. Thank you for that. Again, thank you all for your time here today. So lastly, I just wanted to quickly kind of share out with you all what the next steps are going to be. Again, we've had 10 total meetings. With this one today, we've actually held 4 now on sustainability, safety and climate adaptation, health, environmental justice, and equity. And obviously today on mobility, and the 6 we have remaining starting next week will be on land use, on parks, public facilities and conservation, and housing. And in between those, we're also going to have meetings that are sub-area focused like we've done in the past on East of 101, Lindenville, and downtown. So please stay informed. Thank you so much for the time, and please share this information out with your colleagues, neighbors, and friends. The more the merrier. And as I mentioned before as well, we do have recordings from all of these presentations that will be posted to the project website momentarily. We're getting them posted to the city's YouTube page, and then will be posted to the project website as well, so that if for those that weren't able to attend the meetings, you can go there and view them. And then, as I mentioned earlier as well, there is a survey component to this that we're hoping to gather even more information from you all and from those that weren't able to join the meeting. And that will be open until April 16th. So about another month for folks to be able to tap into that as well. And the way that that generally works is you'll get to a page that includes the entire policy framework for mobility. And then on that page, there will be an opportunity to actually comment on any part of that document, and or comment on other folks' comment, or up and down vote, or upload additional information, really interactive that way. And then you could delve much deeper into that individual policy framework, in this case for mobility, or any of the ones that we've discussed to date, and to continue the feedback loop that way. So again, please feel free to go there to add your comments and share that information out with folks so that we get plenty of voices represented in this process. And that will be available on shapessf.com all the way through April 16th. So please do stay tuned and contribute. And with that, just wanted to wrap it again to mention that all the information that you saw here and future will be again posted to the project website, shapessf.net or .com. And if you have any specific questions or comments, Lisa Costa-Sanders' contact information is on the screen at lisa.costasanders@ssf.net. And unless there's anything else from the team that I may have missed, I think we're going to end this right at 1 o'clock. So thank you all again for your time and effort and joining us here today. And we look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.